Hey, welcome to Horror Ecos. Before we start, just a quick note. After the first few minutes, the rest of the video plays without breaks. So get comfortable and give it a try. I think you'll enjoy these stories. If you do, you can like and subscribe. Only if you really want to. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time it is for you? I read them every night. All right, let's begin tonight's story. Story start now. My dog stood outside my bedroom door every night at 2 a.m. while I slept. For an entire hour, just watching. I want to start by telling you that I am a rational person. I do not say that to brag, or to set myself up as someone whose judgment is especially reliable, or whose perception of events should carry extra weight. I say it because it is relevant context for everything that follows. Because the story I am about to tell you is the kind of story that sounds, on first hearing, like the kind of thing a non-rational person tells. The kind of thing that gets explained away with a wave of a hand and a comment about anxiety or sleep deprivation or an overactive imagination. And I want you to know before I tell it that I spent a long time trying to explain it away myself, and I could not. And the reason I could not is that I eventually found the footage. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, which starts the way a lot of the most unsettling things start, with a sound in the dark. I live alone. That is the first important fact. I have lived alone for a while now, long enough that I have become very familiar with the particular sound profile of my house at night, the way all the different parts of it settle and creak and breathe when the lights are off and the day is over and there is no human activity happening to generate noise. Every house has its own set of nighttime sounds, the specific vocabulary of a building existing in quiet. And if you live in a place long enough, you learn that vocabulary without trying to. You absorb it the way you absorb any language you are exposed to every day, until it becomes background, until it becomes the baseline against which you measure everything else you hear. I know my house's nighttime sounds. I know which floorboard in the upstairs hallway shifts when the temperature drops. I know the sound the refrigerator makes when its compressor kicks on. I know the particular creak of the back door expanding in its frame after rain. I know all of it, every piece of the acoustic furniture of this place. And I know it well enough that when something does not belong, when a sound appears that is not part of the established vocabulary, I notice it. I also have Chester. Chester is a pit bull, and I want to take a moment here to describe Chester as he was before all of this happened. Because I think it matters. Because the Chester I am going to describe at the beginning of this story and the Chester I am going to describe later are two different animals, and understanding the before makes the after land with the weight it deserves. Chester was, for most of the time I have known him, the single most uncomplicated living being I have ever shared space with. He was big and affectionate in the way that pit bulls often are when they are well loved, which is to say completely, with every cell without reservation or strategy. He was enthusiastic about food and about people and about the particular patch of sunlight that moved across the living room floor in the afternoon. He was afraid of thunderstorms and of the vacuum cleaner, and of, interestingly and relevantly, the stairs. I do not know why Chester was afraid of the stairs. It was just a thing about him, a quirk I had accepted and accommodated the way you accept and accommodate the quirks of anyone you live with. He would stand at the bottom of them and look up with an expression that was not quite fearful but was definitely resolute. The expression of a creature that has made a decision and is committed to it. The stairs were not for him. Chester slept downstairs on his bed in the living room or sometimes on the couch when he thought he could get away with it. And I slept upstairs, and the stairs were the border between our two territories, uncrossed, consistent, a fixed feature of the geography of our shared life. I tell you all of this so you understand what I understood, or thought I understood, before the first night. The first night I heard it, I had been asleep for several hours. Not restless, not half awake, genuinely asleep in the specific and heavy way that comes after a full day. Whatever pulled me out of it was not gradual. It was immediate, the kind of waking up where your eyes are open and you are already listening before you have consciously decided to do anything. The room was dark. The house was quiet in the way it is always quiet at that hour. And then the sound. Tick, tick. Tick, 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 tick. A small sound, rhythmic, from outside my bedroom door in the hallway.
The sound of something moving on the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway in a pattern that was regular and deliberate. Two sounds close together, and then a brief pause, and then two more. I lay in bed and listened to it and tried to place it in the vocabulary of sounds I knew, tried to find a category it fit into, and I could not. It was not the refrigerator. It was not the floorboard that shifted in the cold. It was not the back door. It was something I had not heard before, from a part of the house where, in the middle of the night, there was not supposed to be anything generating sound. My first thought was Chester. My first thought is almost always Chester when I hear something unexpected. Because having a dog means living with a creature whose movements and activities produce a constant, ambient soundtrack of thumps and scratches and the particular percussion of paws on different floor surfaces. But Chester did not do the stairs. Chester had never done the stairs, so it was not Chester. I looked at the clock. 2 a.m. exactly. I got up. I crossed the room. I pulled the door open and I checked the hallway in both directions. Empty. Left, empty. Right, empty. The hallway was exactly as it should have been. Dark and quiet and containing nothing except the familiar geometry of walls and floor and the closed doors of the other rooms. I stood in my doorway for a moment and looked at the nothing and felt the specific feeling of a person who has heard something real and found no explanation for it, which is a feeling that is different from relief and different from fear, and sits somewhere between them in a space that does not have a comfortable name. I went back to bed. I told myself I had been dreaming, which was possible, which was the most likely explanation, which was the explanation I was going to commit to because the alternative required me to accept that something had been outside my door and had somehow vanished in the second it took me to open it. The second night, I woke to the same sound at the same time. Two sounds close together, brief pause, two more, over and over, from outside my door at exactly 2 in the morning. This time I was more awake before I was fully awake. If that makes sense, this time some part of me had been waiting for it. Had been set to alert by the previous night in a way I had not consciously registered, but that my nervous system had apparently taken seriously. I lay there for a moment and listened to it, and then I got up and I got the baseball bat from the corner before I opened the door. Because 2 nights in a row is not a dream. I checked the hallway. Empty. I went down the stairs, bat in hand, and checked the kitchen and the living room, turning on lights as I went. Chester was on the couch, head up, watching me with the alert curiosity of a dog who is used to his person being predictable and is noting an exception. Nothing else moved. Nothing else was anywhere it should not have been. I stood in my living room at 2 in the morning holding a baseball bat and looked at my dog, and my dog looked at me, and neither of us had any explanation to offer the other. I went back to bed, but I did not sleep well, and the next day I spent more time than I wanted to admit turning the question over in my head. 2 nights. Same sound. Same time. Same hallway. Same empty hallway when I went to look. This was a pattern. Patterns are not dreams. The third night it happened again. And this time I did not get up, partly because I had already established twice that getting up produced no useful information, and partly because there was something about lying in bed and listening to that sound that felt important, felt like paying attention to something I needed to pay attention to, rather than running from it. I lay there and I listened to the tick-tick, 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 tick-tick of something moving in my upstairs hallway at 2 in the morning, and I thought about what could produce that specific sound, and I tried to map it onto every possibility I could construct. Rodents was the logical answer, except that rodents and walls do not produce the sound of something with 2 feet moving in a deliberate and rhythmic pattern on a wood floor. A squatter was the other answer that presented itself, except that someone living in my house without my knowledge at night and disappearing. Every time I checked was a level of operational sophistication that strained credibility. And besides, every time I checked the house there was nothing to find. The next day after work I went to the hardware store and I bought an indoor security camera. Not because I was afraid exactly, because I needed to know. Because the not knowing was sitting in me in a way that was making it hard to do other things with my attention. Whatever was out there, I needed to see it. I needed to have something I could look at and evaluate and make a decision about. Information felt like the most important thing in the world to me at that point. More important than sleep, more important than comfort, more important than the possibility that whatever I found on the footage was going to be worse than not knowing. I got home and the weather had shifted the way weather does sometimes in late afternoon. The sky going from clear to complicated very quickly. Clouds coming in from the west carrying rain and wind. Hail hit my windshield on the drive into the neighborhood, 2 or 3 sharp cracks that made me flinch.
I pulled into the garage as the storm started arriving in earnest. Ice on the pavement and rain against the siding and the sound of wind moving through the trees at the edge of the property. I got the ladder and I went upstairs and I mounted the camera at ceiling height in the hallway, angled to cover the full length of it from the top of the stairs to my bedroom door. The camera had night vision and motion detection and stored footage on an SD card. Anything that moved in that hallway would be recorded. I checked the angle twice, made sure the lens was capturing the full width of the space, and then I went downstairs and sat on the couch with Chester and watched something on television while the storm knocked itself out against the house. Chester was pressed against my leg the way he always was during storms, his warm, heavy weight a comfort in both directions, him taking reassurance from contact with me taking reassurance from contact with him. I scratched behind his ears and he leaned into it and we stayed like that until 10. And then I let him out one last time into the wet yard and watched him from the back door. And then we went to our separate parts of the house and I went to bed. The storm had softened by the time I was in bed. Just rain now, steady and gentle on the roof. The particular sound that rain on a roof makes when the violence of the storm is over, and what remains is just the quiet persistence of water falling, which is one of the most reliably sleep-inducing sounds in the entire catalog of things the natural world produces. I lay there and listened to it, and let it pull me down and under and away. I slept through the whole night. No waking at 2. No sound in the hallway. Just continuous. Uninterrupted sleep until morning light came through the window, and birds started up outside, and I opened my eyes to an ordinary morning with ordinary light, and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary day getting started. I lay there for a moment and noticed the absence of the 2 a.m. experience, and felt a complicated thing about it. Not quite relieved. Something more careful than relief. Because the camera had been running all night, and if the camera had captured motion at 2, that meant something had been there even when I slept through it. And if the camera had captured nothing, then maybe whatever this was had been disrupted by the installation, had noticed the new equipment, and decided to behave differently. I got up. I let Chester out. I made coffee. I got the ladder and climbed up and took out the SD card and carried it downstairs to my laptop on the kitchen counter. Chester came back in and curled up under the table at my feet, his warm weight against my ankle. The most reliable and constant comfort in my daily life. I slid the card into the laptop. One new recording. Time-stamped 2 a.m. I sat there and looked at the notification for a moment. The coffee was warm in my hands. Chester was a solid pressure against my foot. Outside the window, the morning was doing its ordinary morning things, and I had a recording from 2 in the morning that had been triggered by motion in my upstairs hallway. I moved the mouse to the playhead and I pressed play. The camera's night vision turned everything a greenish gray, the particular color of the world as seen by a lens that is doing its best in the absence of visible light. The hallway was still and empty, the same hallway I had looked at and found empty 3 nights in a row. The image was grainy the way night vision images are grainy, not quite resolved, shaped slightly soft at the edges. At the top of the stairs, at the right edge of the frame where the hallway opened up to the staircase landing, there was movement. Something was coming up the stairs. Something was coming up the stairs. I watched it appear at the top step, the top of a head first, then more of it. Climbing into the hallway frame with the deliberate, careful movement of something that was trying to move quietly. And then it was fully in the hallway and I could see what it was and every possible explanation I had been carrying. Around in my head for the past several nights fell away all at once like a structure whose foundation has been removed. It was Chester. Chester who did not do stairs. Chester who had never in all the time I had known him climb those stairs. Who stood at the bottom of them with that look of settled resolution. Who slept downstairs every night without exception while I slept above him. Who was currently curled up against my feet under the kitchen table. Chester was on the camera footage. At the top of the stairs at 2 in the morning, in the upstairs hallway. I watched him move. This is the part that I keep coming back to. The specific quality of his movement because it was not Chester's movement. Chester moved the way Chester moved,
which was the way most big, confident dogs move, with a sort of easy physical authority, taking up the space he occupied without particularly thinking about it. His body doing what his body did without a lot of deliberate attention to the mechanics of it. What I was watching on the screen was not that. What I was watching was a dog that was thinking about every step.
That was calculating the placement of each foot before putting it down, adjusting for sound, moving in a way that was as close to silent as something his size could achieve on a hardwood floor. Moving the way something moves when it is trying very hard not to be heard. Tick, tick. Tick, 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 tick. The sound on the footage faint but clear through the camera's microphone. The sound I had been hearing for 3 nights from my bed. Chester's nails on the hardwood, carefully placed, carefully timed, but not quite silent because nothing of his size could be quite silent on that floor. The nails finding the wood with each step and producing the exact small sound that had been pulling me out of sleep at 2 a.m. for the better part of a week. He moved down the hallway toward my door with the kind of focus I had never seen in him before. Head slightly lowered, body carried differently than I had ever seen his body carried. He stopped when he was a few feet from my door. He stood there for a moment, still as I had rarely seen him be still, because Chester was normally a dog in motion even in his stillness, breathing and shifting and adjusting the way living things adjust, the micro-movements of just being alive. The stillness was different. The stillness was chosen, and then his body twitched. A single full-body movement, not a flinch, not a startle, something more like a reset, like something changing settings. And then, slowly, with an awkwardness that spoke to the difficulty of the task, but also with the clear intention of completing it, he lowered his front end to the floor and pushed off his front legs and rose. He rose up onto his back legs. He found his balance on them, which took a moment, which required the small adjustments that standing on 2 legs when you are built for 4 requires. And then he was standing, upright. In the hallway outside my bedroom door at 2 a.m. while I slept 12 feet away on the other side of the wall. He walked forward on 2 legs. Just a step or 2, just enough to close the remaining distance between himself and my door. And then he stopped, and he turned to face the door. And he stood there and he looked at it. The camera's motion detection disengaged. Chester was standing still enough, for long enough, that the system interpreted the absence of motion as the absence of anything to record. The footage stopped. I sat at my kitchen table and I stared at the laptop screen that was now showing me the still image of an empty hallway. And I thought about the fact that Chester was under the table against my feet right now. And I thought about the recording. And I thought about every night I had slept in that room with no idea that something was standing outside my door in the dark. But there was more footage. I had not looked at all of it yet. I found the recording that started at 3 a.m, an hour after the first one, triggered again by motion in the hallway. I opened it. Chester was still there, standing on 2 legs, facing my door. Still and quiet in the way he had been still and quiet when the first recording ended. He had been standing there for an entire hour. The whole time I had been sleeping on the other side of that door, not knowing, not hearing anything because he had stopped moving. Because the tick-tick of his nails only happened when he was walking, and he had stopped walking and was just standing, just being there, just watching the door, what he was doing, what he was thinking, what he was waiting for. I cannot tell you. I have spent a lot of time with those questions and I do not have answers for any of them. And the fact that I do not have answers is the thing that goes deepest, that sits most uncomfortably. That comes back most reliably in the moments when I am between sleeping and waking, and the mind is at its most unguarded. An hour. He stood there for an entire hour while I slept. Watching. Waiting. In the 3 a.m. footage, eventually, he lowered himself back to all 4s. The return to 4 legs had a finality to it that was different from the deliberate, careful quality of everything that had preceded it. It looked like the conclusion of something, like a task completed or a decision made or a particular kind of patience running out. He turned from my door and walked back down the hallway toward the stairs. At the top of the stairs, he paused for just a moment, just long enough for me to notice the pause, and then he went down, and he was gone from the frame, and the hallway was empty again. And in 4 hours I would wake up to birdsong and sunlight and a completely ordinary morning. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after I watched that footage. Chester was still under the table. He raised his head and looked at me at some point,
the way he always looked at me, the way I had always taken to mean affection and the particular kind of attentiveness that dogs have toward the people they are bonded to. I looked back at him and I tried to see in his face whatever it was that had been expressed in that hallway at 2 and 3 in the morning, and I could not find it. And I did not know if that was because it was not there, or because I did not know how to look for it.
I have since gotten rid of Chester. I want to be honest about that, and I want to be honest about the fact that making that decision was one of the hardest things I have done in recent memory, because Chester had been my companion for years, because I loved him in the uncomplicated way you love a creature who has never given you reason to feel anything else, because the Chester I had known and lived with and sat on the couch with during storms was not in any way that I could access in the ordinary hours of our ordinary life together. The thing that was standing in my hallway at 2 in the morning. But they were the same animal. That is the part I cannot reconcile. Whatever was in that hallway came from downstairs, from the living room, from the spot where Chester slept. Whatever was in that hallway went back downstairs at 3 a.m. and became Chester again by morning. They were the same animal, and I do not know what that means, and I do not know if anyone could tell me what it means. And living with that uncertainty, while also living with the animal it concerned, turned out to be something I could not continue to do. I want to be careful here about what I am claiming, because I think clarity is important, and I think it is easy in these situations to let what you feel overtake what you actually know. What I know is what the footage showed. A dog that had never climbed my stairs climbing my stairs at 2 in the morning, moving with deliberate quiet, standing upright outside my bedroom door, watching the door for a full unbroken hour while I slept on the other side of it, and then returning downstairs at 3 a.m. That is what I know. What it means, why he did it, what was in his mind or not in his mind during that hour of watching and waiting, I do not know and cannot claim to know. What I feel is something different and harder to put into language. What I feel when I think about that footage is the specific discomfort of realizing that something you trusted completely was, at some level and in some hours, something other than what you understood it to be. Not dangerous, necessarily. Not malicious, maybe. But other. And present in your most vulnerable hours in a way you had not consented to and had not known about until a camera told you. The house is different now without him. Quieter in ways that are sometimes peaceful and sometimes not. I sleep through the night, no tick-tick in the hallway, no 2 a.m. wakefulness, no sound outside my door that I cannot explain. The stairs are just stairs again, a neutral piece of domestic architecture with no meaning beyond the functional. But I still look at the clock sometimes when I wake in the night. And when it says 2 o'clock, when the green numbers of my bedside clock arrange themselves into that particular configuration, I feel something that is not quite fear and not quite grief, and sits in the specific uncomfortable space between them. I lie in the dark and I listen to the silence of an empty hallway, and I am grateful for the silence, and I am grateful for the nothing that is there, and underneath the gratitude, underneath the relief, there is something else. A question that does not have an answer. A set of hours that I lived through without knowing what was happening 12 feet away from where I slept. A door that stood between me and something I thought I understood, and the slow creeping understanding that I had not understood it at all, and that it had been standing on the other side of that door for who knows how many nights before I installed the camera, watching, with a patience that I cannot explain and a purpose that I will never know. I do not know what Chester was waiting for. I do not know what he would have done if the door had opened on its own. I do not know if the patience was endless or if it would have eventually run out. If one night the waiting would have become something else. If the door was the only thing that stood between whatever that hour-long vigil was building toward and the sleeping person on the other side of it. I do not know. And living with not knowing, it turns out, is its own particular kind of company. Quiet and persistent and present in the small hours. The kind that does not announce itself and does not leave. The kind that just watches. Just like he did. Next one's story start now. He was not a demon. He was not a monster. He was something far worse. And he was already inside the village before anyone knew to be afraid. There is a kind of evil that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fire or screaming or any of the dramatic signals that stories have taught us to watch for. It does not wear a face that is wrong in an obvious way. It does not make the air feel different when it enters a room.
does not make animals shy away, does not cause children to cry for reasons their parents cannot explain. It is not evil in the way that word is usually meant, because evil, as most people understand it, implies something that wants, something that desires destruction, that takes pleasure in pain, that feels the specific heat of cruelty and calls it satisfaction. What walked into that village in the valley was not that kind of thing. It was worse than that kind of thing. It was worse because it wanted nothing. It felt nothing. It had lived so long and absorbed so much and moved through so many bodies and so many centuries that the machinery of feeling had simply worn down to nothing. The way a road wears down under enough weight and enough time until there is nothing, left but the hard, flat surface that remains when everything softer has been ground away. It wore the shape of an old man. This is the first thing you need to understand because the shape matters. An old man with a walking staff and empty eyes, moving slowly, looking harmless in the specific way that old and frail things look harmless. Because we have been taught that age means diminishment, that the shell wearing down on the outside reflects something wearing down on the inside. This is one of the oldest and most reliable mistakes that human beings make. We look at the surface of a thing and we decide we understand its contents. And the surface of this particular thing was designed, consciously or simply by long practice, to produce exactly the response it needed. Pity. Hospitality. The particular generosity that people extend to the old and the tired and the apparently helpless. The village sat in a valley the way all the small and forgotten places of the world sit in valleys, tucked down between higher ground on both sides, protected from the worst of the weather, nourished by the water that runs down from the mountains, small enough that everyone in it knew everyone else, and large enough that strangers were noticed but not turned away. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, where the seasons changed and the crops grew and the children became adults, and the adults became old and the cycle of ordinary life turned slowly and completely, without ever producing anything that would be remembered beyond its own borders. The kind of place that history passes over. The kind of place where people live out entire lifetimes in the same square mile of ground without ever questioning whether there is anything else. It was, in other words, exactly the kind of place where no one would be watching for what was coming. He came down from the mountains with a staff in his hand and eyes that were the wrong kind of empty. Not the empty of a tired man or an old man or a man who has seen too much and chosen to shut it out. The emptiness of something that had moved through too many lives and too many years and simply stopped registering them as distinct from one another. The empty space after everything has been taken out and nothing put back. The people in the village looked at those eyes and processed them as the eyes of an old and weary traveler, because that was the closest available category. Because the human mind maps the unfamiliar onto the familiar, because the alternative is to accept that there are things in the world for which no familiar map exists. A woman named Mira offered him bread. This is how it started, with the most ordinary of human gestures, the extension of food to someone who appears to need it. An act so basic and so instinctive and so thoroughly woven into every human culture that it barely registers as a choice. You see someone who looks hungry and you offer what you have. It is the foundation of hospitality, of community, of the whole interlocking system of small kindnesses that allows groups of people to live near each other without destroying each other. Mira offered bread, and he took it, and she smiled, and he registered the smile the way a stone registers rain, as a thing that was happening, not as a thing that meant anything. She had a child on her hip. A boy named Tomas with dark hair and eyes that were already doing the thing that children's eyes do before the world teaches them not to, looking directly at what is actually there, rather than at what they have been told is supposed to be there. Tomas looked at the old man, and the old man looked at Tomas, and neither of them flinched, but for completely different reasons. Tomas did not flinch because he was a child and had not yet learned that some things are safer when you do not look directly at them. The old man did not flinch because flinching requires a nervous system that still registers threat and response as meaningful, and his had long since moved past that. Mira asked where he was from. He told her. She asked where he was going. He told her that too. She offered him a place to stay, and he accepted because acceptance required less effort than refusal, and efficiency had become the only organizing principle of his existence. Her house was small and imperfect. The roof leaked in one corner, and the fire never quite managed to warm the whole space. But she gave him the best spot near the hearth because she was kind, and he settled into it the way water settles into the lowest available point, without gratitude and without the sense that any of it was a gift. He stayed, not because he wanted to, because wanting had gone the way of everything else, but because the village had what he needed, and he had learned, across centuries of practice, that patience was the most powerful tool available to a being that had unlimited time. The first person he chose was the miller. The miller was the kind of man that every small community produces and no small community knows how to handle. The man whose size and certainty and casual willingness to hurt people has allowed him to operate without accountability for so long that he has stopped being able to imagine accountability as a real thing. He hit his wife. He hit his children. He did it not in moments of uncontrolled rage, but in the calm and organized way of someone performing a regular maintenance task. Methodically, without particular emotion, the way other men might sharpen tools or oil hinges.
His wife's bruises had a rhythm to them, a regular pattern of appearing and fading and appearing again that everyone in the village had noticed, and nobody had addressed, because addressing it would require confrontation, and confrontation has costs. And in small communities where everyone depends on everyone, the costs of confrontation are often judged too high. The old man watched the miller for 7 days. He watched with the specific quality of attention that he had developed across his long existence, which was not the attention of someone looking for weakness or opportunity in the conventional sense, but the attention of something assessing the contents of a vessel before deciding what to take from it. He watched the way the miller moved, the specific configuration of his physical presence in the world, the way his body occupied space with an entitlement so deep it had become invisible to the man himself. He watched the children make themselves small and quiet when they heard the particular sound of their father's boots on the threshold. He watched the wife develop the specific flinch that people develop when they have been hit, often enough that the anticipation of a blow becomes indistinguishable from the blow itself. On the 8th day, he followed the miller into the forest. The miller saw an old man and laughed. The involuntary contemptuous laughter of someone who has organized the world into the things that can hurt him and the things that cannot, and has placed old men in the cannot column without checking carefully enough. He kept laughing until a hand was placed on his chest and the laughing stopped. Not because the hand was violent, because it was not. It was simply present, and the presence of it communicated something that bypassed the miller's mind entirely and went directly to whatever part of him was still capable of animal response. The ancient and reliable part that recognizes a predator even when the predator's shape is unfamiliar. His body understood before his mind did. His body stopped. His mind caught up a moment later, and the thing that moved through his face in that last interval was the specific expression of a man who has looked up from his ordinary life and found something looking back that has no place in the map of ordinary things. He took what the miller had. The years remaining, the physical strength, the warmth that living bodies carry and do not know they carry until it is gone. He took it the way he took everything, without ceremony, without the weight of any particular feeling about the transaction. The miller crumpled. He left him there and walked back to the village and sat by Mira's fire and felt the new warmth settle into his bones, and it was good the way weather is good or bad. A fact of conditions, not a thing that touched anything deeper. The merchant came through the village a few weeks later. He was the kind of man that commerce produces in every era. The man for whom everything is a negotiation, and every negotiation is an opportunity, and every opportunity exists to be taken advantage of by someone. And the only question is whether you are the taker or the taken. He was not violent. He was not cruel in any way that left marks. He simply shaved a little off every transaction, kept the weights a little light, let the interest compound a little beyond what was agreed, and smiled the smile of a man who believes that the game of commerce is played by whoever is willing to be most diligently dishonest about the rules. When he encountered what appeared to be an old man alone on a road, he reached for his knife. He had done this before. He had a clear hierarchy of how the world worked, and where old men traveling alone fell within it. And he reached for the knife with the confidence of someone who has never had his hierarchy seriously questioned. He learned that the hierarchy was a story he had been telling himself. Stories, in the end, are very easily interrupted. The old man took the merchant's certainty, not his intelligence, which was small and serviceable, not his life,
Not anything that would be immediately obvious in its absence. Just the bone-deep belief that he was the one holding the knife. That specific flavor of confidence, of being sure that you are the predator in any given room, dissolved out of him the way salt dissolves in warm water, evenly and completely, and without leaving behind any evidence of what had been there. Mira asked where he went at night. He told her he walked because old men needed movement the way young men needed sleep. And she accepted this because she was a woman with a leaking roof and a dead husband and a child to raise and a stranger she had let into her home out of kindness. And the kind thing to do when someone gives you a simple explanation for something that is slightly puzzling is to accept it and move forward.
The alternative, looking closely enough at the stranger in your hearth corner to see what was actually there, required a kind of energy that she was already spending in other directions. Tomas did not accept it. Tomas watched with the eyes he had been born with, the ones that had not yet learned to sort what they saw into the acceptable and the unacceptable, the explainable and the thing that must be explained away for the sake of everyone's comfort. He watched from corners, from doorways, from the particular vantage point of a child who has understood that adults are not always as in control of things as they present themselves to be, and who has therefore learned to do his own observing and draw his own conclusions. He watched the old man at the fire, and he felt the thing that the old man generated in the space around him, which was not cold exactly, and not heat exactly, but something more like the feeling of standing at the edge of a very deep place, and understanding the depth with your body before your mind has processed the information. One night Tomas followed him into the forest. He hid behind a tree, and he was very still, and he held his breath as tight as he could, and he watched. He saw the merchant. He saw what happened to the merchant. He saw the hand on the chest and the man going down and the old man standing over what remained. And then the old man turned and looked directly at him through the dark, and they held each other's gaze across the space between the tree and the body on the ground. And Tomas ran. The old man let him run. Not out of mercy. Mercy requires caring about outcomes. He let him run because there was time. There was always time. And a frightened child running into the night would arrive back at his starting point eventually. Everything did. Everything came back around if you simply waited with enough patience.
Tomas was gone in the morning. Mira searched. She called his name until her voice was a raw and broken thing, and she came back to the house without him, and she looked at the old man with desperate eyes and asked if he had seen her son. He said no, and it was technically true, because he had seen a boy running, and he had not seen a boy since. And the distinction between seeing and caring about what he saw was one that he had long since stopped treating as meaningful. She wept for 3 days in the specific way that people weep when they are not weeping for someone they know to be dead, but for someone they cannot locate, which is a particular kind of grief because it has no conclusion, because it asks you to hold the worst possible outcome in one hand and the still possible hope in the other, and not let either go. On the 4th day, she stopped weeping because the practical business of staying alive required her attention and grief, however real. Does not do dishes or mend fences or feed animals or do any of the other things that the ordinary maintenance of a life requires. She moved through the house like a ghost of herself, doing the necessary things, existing rather than living. The old man watched her the way he watched everything, with the patient and uninflected attention of a creature for whom all of this was simply material. Tomas came back on the 5th night. He stood in the doorway, very thin, very pale, his eyes occupying more of his face than they had before. The kind of eyes that only come from seeing something that cannot be unseen. Something that has rearranged the internal architecture of a person at a level deep enough that it shows on the surface.
He looked at his mother and he looked at the old man and he did not speak. Mira held him. She wept again, differently this time, the relief version, the one that has a bottom to it, a place where it lands and rests. He let her hold him, but his eyes over her shoulder stayed on the old man, not with the flinching avoidance of someone who is afraid to look at something, but with the level and careful attention of someone who has decided that looking away is more dangerous than looking directly. The old man smiled. A smile in his current form was a tool like any other, a thing that produced a specific response in the people who received it. That said, everything is normal here. That I am a person in the ordinary sense of that word. That whatever you think you might have seen or felt or understood is your imagination running ahead of the available evidence.
The next night, while Mira slept, he took something from her. Not her life. Not her health. Not anything that would be immediately visible. He took the precise image of her husband's face. Just that, just the visual memory, the specific way light had fallen on those features, the specific configuration of bone and skin and expression that had constituted the face of the man she had loved. He left the grief intact. He left the knowledge that there was a husband, that he had died, that she missed him. He left all the feelings associated with the face while removing the face itself. The way you might take the label off a jar and leave the jar standing, everything about it the same except the part that says what it contains. She woke up and looked at his picture and stood there for a long time with the specific confusion of a person who knows that something should be producing a response, but cannot find the response in themselves. The image meant nothing. She knew it should mean something. The gap between what it was and what she knew it was supposed to be sat in her like a new and unnamed wound that she could feel but not locate. She put the picture away and went about her day. Tomas watched her do it, and he knew, and the knowing was its own kind of wound. The village changed over the weeks and months that followed. Not in any way that was immediately dramatic. Not in any way that could be pointed to and named. People simply began to lose things. A woman could not remember her child's first word. The specific syllable that had come out of a tiny mouth one ordinary morning, and had been one of the most important sounds she had ever heard. A farmer lost his ability to read the sky, the accumulated knowledge of watching weather his whole life that told him when to plant and when to harvest, and when to bring the animals in. Gone suddenly and completely the way things sometimes go in dreams. A young man forgot the face of the woman he intended to marry. Not the love, not the intention, just the face itself, leaving him with a feeling attached to nothing, a warmth with no source. They came to the old man, some of them not knowing why. The old man by the fire, the one with the empty eyes, the one who listened without judgment or interruption, who murmured and nodded and sat with them in their confusion. He was patient. He was always patient. And each time one of them sat with him and poured out their confusion, he took a little more. Tomas watched all of it. He grew thinner as the weeks passed. He stopped eating with any real intention. The way people stop eating when they are using all available resources for something else. When the machinery of their body is doing something more urgent than metabolizing food. He stopped speaking. He sat in his corner and he watched the old man, and his face became the face of someone who has understood something completely and wished they had not. Mira tried to reach him. She offered food and warmth and the specific comfort of physical presence that mothers offer when words are not enough, and he accepted her presence without pushing it away, but also without letting it in. The way you accept shelter from rain when shelter is all that is available, even though you are already soaked through. On the last night, Tomas came to the fire. He was very small and very still, standing in the firelight. And his voice when he spoke was the voice of someone who had decided that speaking was necessary even though it changed nothing. Even though the answer to what he was about to ask did not exist in any form that would help him. He asked what the old man was. He was told the truth because the truth was no longer a thing that required protection or concealment. He was told that what sat before him was what remains after everything else is gone, after love and hate and hope and fear have all worn down to nothing. After every feeling and every attachment and every belief in the significance of things has been ground away by enough time and enough loss. He was told that it was the thing that keeps moving, not because moving means anything, but because stopping is simply more effort than continuing. Tomas asked why. Why keep moving? Why keep going? Why keep doing the thing that had been done to this village and the villages before it, and all the places that had been visited across all the centuries? There was no answer. Not because one was being withheld. Because the question itself had no meaningful contact with whatever the old man had become. A river does not have a reason for flowing. The wind does not have a reason for blowing. These things happen because the conditions that produce them exist and the conditions that would stop them do not. The question of why assumes a chooser, and what sat by that fire had moved so far past choosing that the word had lost all purchase. A hand was placed on Tomas' chest. He did not flinch. He was past flinching. Had moved through fear and out the other side into something that was not acceptance exactly, but was the stillness of someone who has looked at a thing long enough that the looking itself has become a kind of action. a kind of standing ground. He felt the hand. He felt what the hand was doing, the way a person feels a light going out in a room they are sitting in. The change in the quality of the air, the shift in what is available. The fear went first, then the confusion. Then, last and most stubborn, the small determined hope that had kept him coming back to this room and watching and not running again. The hope that somehow, still, the thing could be stopped or reversed or made to mean something other than what it meant. That went too. He crumpled. The old man stepped over him and walked out into the night. In the morning, Mira found her son on the floor by the dead fire, and the scream she made was the sound of someone losing the last thing. The thing they had organized everything else around. The thing that had made the other losses survivable. She held him. She called for help. She looked for the old man, and he was not there and had not been there for hours. He was on the road heading east, moving with the particular efficiency of something that has no reason to hurry and no reason to slow down. Behind him, the valley held its village and its slow forgetting and its people making their way through days that had been emptied of certain essential things. Ahead of him was another valley, another cluster of rooftops, another set of fires with people gathered around them telling themselves the stories that people tell to make the dark feel manageable. The sun came up. The road was long. His legs moved. His lungs filled and emptied. His heart beat with the dull and endless rhythm that had been beating since long before anyone currently alive could remember, would continue beating long after everyone currently alive had been folded back into the ground. He felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not the specific pleasure of a job completed. Not even the faint and diminishing echo of anything that had once been feeling. Just the road and the movement, and the next thing, and the next, after that. Stretching out ahead into the distance until the distance itself became a kind of meaning. Which it was not. It was just distance. It was just more road. It was just the world going on in the way it always had and always would. Indifferent and empty and exactly as full of the things that eat at the people in it as it had ever been. He walked. There was nothing else.
There is something I want you to understand before you finish reading this.
Something that I think is important, and that the story itself almost says but does not quite say directly enough for me to trust it to the almost. If you ever meet someone with eyes like the ones I have been describing, you will know them. Not because they will look strange or wrong in any obvious way, not because they will set off any alarm that you can point to, but because of the specific quality of the nothing that emanates from them. Most people, even the most damaged and the most defended and the most closed off, still have something behind their eyes. Some residue of the person they are, some flicker of investment in their own continued existence, some trace of the feelings they spend their energy trying not to show. This is not visible exactly, but it is perceptible, the way warmth is perceptible before you are close enough to a fire to feel it as heat. This one will have none of that. Not diminished, not hidden. Gone. The space where it would be will just be space. The way the space inside an empty jar is just the absence of whatever the jar used to hold. Do not offer bread. Do not give a place by the fire. Do not extend the hospitality that your instincts toward kindness will tell you is the right response to someone who appears in need. Kindness is a beautiful thing, and I am not telling you it is wrong. I am telling you that it is, in this specific case, what opens the door. He is not evil. He is not a demon in the sense that requires intention and desire, and the specific pleasure of causing harm.
He is something that has moved past all of those things into something that is harder to name and harder to protect against, because evil you can recognize and evil you can resist, and evil has a shape that fits into the existing categories of things you have been taught to watch for. This does not fit any of those categories. This is the shape of the world after the world has stopped pretending to mean anything. This is what is left when everything that makes a life rather than just a biological event has been removed. Piece by piece until nothing remains except the mechanism that keeps moving because it has forgotten how to stop. He is patient. He has time in quantities that make the word time inadequate for describing what he has. He is already walking toward the next valley. He has already identified the next fire. The next kind woman with a child on her hip and a roof that leaks and a heart open enough to make room for a stranger. He will take something small first, something you will not miss immediately. Something that will leave a gap you cannot name, a door with no label, a feeling attached to nothing.
a grief with no source. And by the time you understand what has been taken, there will already be less of you available to do anything about it. The boy Tomas knew. He looked directly at it and he understood it, and he came back and he watched and he tried, with everything he had, to stand between what was in his home and what it was doing to the world around him. He tried with his seeing and his watching, and his stubborn refusal to stop looking at the thing, even when looking at it cost him more than he could afford. In the end, it was not enough. In the end, it is almost never enough.
The thing has been doing this since before any currently living person was born. Since before the people who taught those people were born, since a time so remote that the words we use for time stop meaning very much. It has absorbed so many small resistances, so many stubborn children and suspicious neighbors, and careful watchers who noticed something was wrong and tried to do something about their noticing. It absorbed all of them the way a river absorbs the stones thrown into it, accepting the impact and closing back over without a mark. But Tomas looked, and looking matters even when it is not enough. And the record of his looking, the fact of a child who stood in a cold doorway with two large eyes and refused to look away from the thing that had come into his home and was eating it from the inside, that matters in the way that resistance always matters even when it fails, which is in a way that is real and true and important, even if it does not change the outcome. He is already on the road east. He is already most of the way to the next valley. He will arrive by nightfall, moving at the pace of something that is not in a hurry, because hurrying implies a destination, and he does not have a destination, only a direction, only the next place and the next fire, and the next person who will look at empty eyes and see only a tired old man in need of bread. The fire is already lit. The bread is already on the table. The kind person is already at the door, already moving toward it, already reaching for the handle. He does not need to knock. He never needs to knock. He only needs to wait. Next one story start now. My job is to study dangerous objects. The last one had no shape, no body, and no mercy. And it was already in the room with me. I want to explain what I do before I tell you what happened, because the what I do is the part that makes the what happened so much worse. And without that context, you might read this as just another strange story from a strange place, which it is. But it is also more than that. It is also a record of the specific moment when the framework I had built to make this job survivable collapsed completely and left me standing in an observation office at some hour of the night. I could no longer determine, looking at an empty containment room and understanding for the first time in my career that empty is not the same as safe. My job title, if you ask me to describe it simply, is rule writer. What that means in practice is that I observe objects. Not objects in the ordinary sense. Not the kind of objects that exist in the world of physics and materials and normal human experience. Objects in the sense that my organization uses the word, which is a category that encompasses things that should not exist by any reasonable account of how existence works. Things that violate the foundational assumptions about the relationship between cause and effect and matter and consequence that human beings have built their understanding of reality on. Things that do things that things are not supposed to be able to do. I observe them. I document what they do. I write the rules for how to handle them safely, which is a phrase that has always contained more optimism than the evidence supports. Because safely is a relative term when what you are working with does not operate within the same parameters as the world you are trying to be safe inside of. I work in a facility called Foxglove Ridge. I live there as well in an enclosure that I have gradually stopped being able to tell apart from a cell, not because the door is locked. Explicitly, it is not. I am told repeatedly that I am not imprisoned, but because the particular combination of what I know and what I have seen and what I am responsible for has made the idea of being anywhere else feel like a problem I do not have the energy to solve. The facility is staffed and populated by people who live in the surrounding community and who come in as needed. As volunteers, as subjects, as the director prefers to call them, though that word has always sat badly with me for reasons I will explain later. I have observed many objects. Each one has cost me something, not in the dramatic and obvious way that some jobs cost people things, not in a way that shows up cleanly on any medical chart or psychological assessment. In the way that water costs something to the stone it runs over, consistently and without drama.
removing small amounts of what was there until the shape of the stone is different from what it was, until the stone has been changed so thoroughly by the slow and patient work of the water that it does not remember its original shape and could not return to it even if it wanted to. I have seen things that redrew the map of what I believed was possible.
I have documented things that required me to construct entirely new categories of understanding because the old categories did not have the right shapes to hold them. I have written rules for things that I did not think could be described by rules, that seemed to operate according to principles so far outside any framework I had access to, that the act of writing rules felt like drawing a map of a country you have never been to using only rumors and the testimony of people who came back from it, changed in ways they could not articulate. I thought I understood the range of what this job could produce. I thought that after enough objects, enough documentation, enough lost sleep and compromised health and the particular ongoing erosion of a life spent this close to things that should not be, I had at least calibrated my expectations correctly. I thought I knew what an object looked like. The last object I observed disabused me of that belief in a way I have not recovered from. I should tell you about the state I was in before I tell you about the object, because the state matters. Because what I am about to describe happened to a person who was already operating in the red zone of his own capacity, who is already existing at the outer edge of what a human being can sustain before the machinery starts to malfunction. The sleep deprivation had been going on long enough that I had stopped being able to clearly distinguish between what I was actually perceiving and what my exhausted brain was generating to fill in the gaps that fatigue creates in perception. The hallucinations had started as small and manageable things, shapes in peripheral vision, sounds that were not quite sounds, the feeling of being watched by something that was not there. They had progressed. On the ceiling of my enclosure, black fluid was moving through the cracks. Dense, slow, viscous, like something pushing through a gap that was not quite wide enough for it. The way liquid finds routes through materials it was not designed to pass through. It smelled of spoiled peaches and something underneath the peaches that I recognized because it was familiar to me in the worst possible way. It was the smell of what my own body produced when it fought against itself, when it hacked and ejected the black fluid that had been coming from my throat and nostrils for longer than I had been willing to officially document. I knew in the part of my mind that retained enough function to assess these things that this was a hallucination. I knew it with the same certainty that I knew the ceiling was real and the fluid was not, that the cracks were there and the thing moving through them was not. But knowing something is a hallucination does not make it stop happening. It just adds a layer of meta-awareness to an experience that continues regardless of your cognitive assessment of it. You stand there knowing it is not real and watching it happen anyway. And the gap between those two things, between what you know and what you are experiencing, is its own particular kind of terrible. There was a part of me that wanted to open my mouth and let whatever was moving through those ceiling cracks drop onto my tongue. I am documenting this because I think it is important, and because one of the remaining commitments I have managed to maintain throughout this period of deterioration is the commitment to accurate documentation, even when what I am documenting is something I am not comfortable with. The wanting was there. It was irrational, and I knew it was irrational, and it was there anyway. The way certain wants are, insisting on themselves in the face of all available reason. Something stopped me each time. Not my own judgment exactly, something more instinctive than judgment, something that operated below the level of conscious decision and interposed itself between the wanting and the acting on the wanting with the specific authority of something that has been responsible for keeping you alive for a long time and has therefore earned the right to override you on certain matters. The pager called me to my office. I went because the pager does not call without the director's authorization, and the director's authorization is not something I have yet found a way to disregard, though I have spent considerable time in recent months trying to understand why that is. My office has a containment window. Behind the window is the containment room. White walls, velvet texture on the ceiling, carefully controlled environment designed to accommodate things that do not accommodate easily. There is a column in the center of the room that objects are typically placed on. A hidden door that connects to the waiting room where subjects wait before being called in. The shutter over the window, when raised, gives me a view of the full interior. I raised the shutter. The motor wheezed and the roller creaked, and I closed my eyes as it rose because I have learned, after enough objects,
That there is a mercy in not seeing something for the first fraction of a second longer.
That the moment before you open your eyes is the last moment in which you are still the person who has not yet seen the thing. And once you open them, that person is gone. And the gap between those two versions of yourself is always, in my experience, larger than you anticipated. I opened my eyes. The room was empty. The column had nothing on it. The walls were clean. The space was simply a room, a white and quiet room with velvet ceiling panels and a hidden door, and nothing inside it that should not have been there. I stood at the window and I looked at the nothing for a long time, and the nothing looked back in the way that empty rooms look back, which is to say, with the complete and impersonal absence of anything looking at all. I considered the possibility that the pager had malfunctioned. I considered the possibility that the director had made an error. I considered the possibility that I was in one of the hallucination states severe enough that I was misperceiving a non-empty room as an empty one, that there was something in there that my mind was refusing to show me. None of these felt right, but all of them felt more right than the alternative, which was that the room was genuinely empty, and I had been called to observe it anyway. I stood there for what I later estimated to be 30 minutes. I watched the empty room and I waited for something to change, and nothing changed. My back began to do the thing it does, the skin prickling in the specific way it prickles when something that I cannot consciously identify has been identified by the part of me that operates below consciousness. The bags under my eyes, the heavy permanent fixtures of my current face, tightened in a way I had not felt them tighten before. There was something in there. I'm going to reproduce the relevant documentation here because I think the documentation is the most precise way to tell the part of the story that needs precision. I will continue my own account around it. The object was classified as the faux fog. The name is wrong in the sense that all names for things like this are wrong, which is that the name points at an aspect of the thing, at the effect it produces, while leaving the nature of the thing itself largely unaddressed. Calling it the faux fog is like calling a river a wetness. It describes something true about it while failing to capture anything essential. The first rule was the one that broke something in me as I was writing it, not because of what it required, but because of what it implied. Upon entering a room that contained the faux fog, one was required to immediately prostrate, and then eat whatever gift was presented. The gift, in the documented cases, was botanical. A swamp rose, its petals opening to reveal whatever it had been given to reveal. The rule was simple, and the violation of it was lethal, and the compliance with it was, at minimum, survivable. The first subject was called in. This is where I have to stop and tell you about the subjects, because I have been circling around this and I need to address it directly. The director says the subjects are volunteers. He said this on my first day and has maintained it consistently, and I have written it into documentation consistently, and I have been, in the meantime, watching subjects follow my instructions with a completeness and immediacy that I have never seen in any genuinely voluntary participant in anything. Voluntary implies a retained right of refusal. Voluntary implies a person who has weighed the available options and selected one of them based on their own assessment of the situation. What I observe in the subjects is something different from that. What I observe is immediate and total compliance without the small hesitations and recalibrations and individual variations that characterize genuine choice. They do what I say when I say it, every time. I have not found a way to finish that thought that does not end somewhere I am not ready to go. So I will return to the documentation. Subject 1 was called in, and after 5 minutes the cameras on the containment room walls and the glass of my window went opaque with condensation, which was the first indication that the room was behaving differently with a subject inside it. The subject's body camera followed. Their glasses camera did not. Through the glasses camera I watched a swamp rose bloom on the floor in front of the prostrating subject, its petals opening to reveal red baneberries nestled inside. The subject asked a question. They asked why they should eat the flower and the berries rather than just the berries. I had not said anything since the subject entered the room. This is documented. The instruction to prostrate was given before entry. I did not issue any subsequent instructions. The subject was responding to something that was not my voice. They ate the flower. The deviation from the gift as presented, eating the vehicle rather than only what the vehicle contained, produced a response that was swift and complete and lethal. The subject died of what the documentation describes as typical vitals for someone in significant physiological distress, which is the kind of language that documentation uses when what actually happened is something that the language of documentation was not built to hold. Subject 2 was told not to eat anything even if instructed to do so. No condensation appeared on the cameras when Subject 2 entered. A swamp rose bloomed anyway, this time offering water plantain flowers. Subject 2 stopped prostrating to investigate. Their brain signal went red before the seizure began. They expired shortly after. What followed the death of Subject 2 was the containment breach, which I will describe not in clinical terms but in the terms that honest description requires. The fog filled the room. He pressed against the false door until the door gave. It moved into the spaces beyond. It found people and wrapped around their heads and necks. 6 people died before the fog became too thin to continue. And from the bodies of those 6, swamp roses grew from the eyes and baneberry branches pushed up through the throats. And this is a thing that happened in a facility where I work, in rooms I have walked through, to people who came to Foxglove Ridge under some arrangement that I am no longer confident was fully explained to them. The fog was suppressed by being vacuumed into a high-pressure container. The container was returned to the containment room and opened. Subject 3 was called in, prostrated, and ate the gift correctly. They survived. After this, my office electronics began behaving differently. Screens brighter, the HVAC smoother and louder. I documented this. The staff note attached to my documentation suggests there was a power surge around the same time, and that no connection to the object can be concluded. I understand why they wrote that. I also understand that the staff note and my own observation are not in conflict in any meaningful way, because one of them is a conclusion and one of them is a fact, and the fact does not require the conclusion to be true in order to have happened. Subject 3 survived the encounter, and I called for extraction after 15 minutes of nothing happening, because nothing happening is what I had been trained to interpret as an indication of safety, which is itself one of the things this object was specifically designed to dismantle as a working assumption. A black air duct punched through the ceiling of the containment room when security entered to extract Subject 3. Not a duct that had been there before. A duct that arrived. The fog it emitted was focused, directed, intentional in the way that a pointed beam is intentional, aimed. The force of it broke the subject's neck. The duct retreated back through the hole it had made in the ceiling and the hole closed behind it. The words reported by Subject 3, the things they heard before the duct appeared, are the part I keep coming back to in the sleep I cannot get, and the waking hours that are increasingly difficult to distinguish from the sleep. Do you think our time was over? Did you not appreciate my gift? You thought you were alone. This is the second rule of the object. Do not assume safety in the absence of fog. The fog is an effect, not the object. I wrote that rule. I wrote it based on what the documentation required me to conclude. And I have spent every hour since writing it trying to understand what it means for every room I have ever stood in. Every moment I have ever spent in a space that was quiet and contained and apparently empty and felt safe because of the quiet and the containment and the apparent emptiness. The fog is an effect, not the object. The thing that produces the fog is not the fog. The thing that produces the fog can be present when the fog is not. And when it is present without the fog, there is no visible evidence of its presence. There is nothing to see or hear or measure that would tell you it is there. It is simply there, in the room with you. Attending to whatever is happening in the room with you, assessing whether its gift has been appreciated and whether you have understood that you are not alone, and whether the time between you and it is over. I thought, before this object, that I understood what I was dealing with. I thought all objects were things, physical presences with locatable edges, items that occupied space in the containable sense of the word. This object is not a thing. This object is a room's behavior. It is the relationship between a space and whatever is in it. It is the presence of something that does not have a physical form in the way that physical forms are usually meant. It is the capacity of a room to become something other than a room when certain conditions are met. Conditions that include the presence of whatever this thing is, and the absence of the specific behaviors that it requires. The implications of this destroyed something in me that I had been relying on without knowing I was relying on it. Because if an object can be a room's behavior, if the category of object extends to things that have no locatable edges, things that exist in the relationship between a space and its contents rather than in the space itself, then the question of which rooms are safe and which are not is no longer a question that can be answered by looking at what is in them. It becomes a question that may not be answerable at all by the tools I have. My hallucinations are worse now. The crimson fires that appear and disappear without heat or destruction. The peach-scented fluid oozing from surfaces that should be solid and dry. These are the things my exhausted brain produces to fill the spaces where certainty used to live. The uncertainty has taken up so much room inside me that there is not much left for other things. The question that has moved into the center of my thinking, the one that was already there before this object and that this object made impossible to continue not answering, is the question about the subjects, about whether they were told, about what volunteering means in a context where the information available to the volunteer has been carefully managed by people with interests in the outcome of the volunteering, about whether a person who agrees to do something they do not fully understand has agreed to the thing they are actually doing. I have watched subjects follow instructions with a completeness I have never seen in genuine volunteers. I have watched them enter rooms containing things that should not exist and do what I told them to do, and bear the consequences of what the things did in response. I have written documentation around those consequences that uses the word expired, because expired is a word that contains less than the words it replaces, that holds the information while keeping it at a distance, that allows the documentation to continue being documentation rather than becoming something else. I could leave. The door of my enclosure is not explicitly locked. I could walk out of this facility and make my way to Foxglove Ridge and find the people who come in as subjects and tell them what I know. Tell them what the rooms look like. Tell them what the objects do. Tell them what expired means in the documentation they have never read. I have not done this. I am documenting that fact with the same commitment to accuracy that I apply to everything else, because the fact of my not doing it is as true as everything else I have recorded here and deserves the same honesty. I know what I know. I know what the subjects do not know. I know that there is a door I could walk through. I sit in my enclosure and the fluid moves across the ceiling in the dark and I can smell the spoiled peaches and I can feel the something primal that stops me from opening my mouth to it. And I lie there and I ask myself the question that the object's reported words put in my mind and have not left. You thought you were alone. There is the thing that disturbs me most. More than the fog and more than the botanical gifts and more than the duct that punched through the ceiling and focused itself into a beam and killed someone with air. What disturbs me most is how long the thing may have been in the rooms I have been working in before the documentation gave it a name. How many observations I have conducted in rooms where I was not, despite my understanding of the situation, actually alone. How many times I sat at my window and looked into a containment space and assessed it as empty and went on with the next thing. And something in there was attending to me with the specific and unhurried patience of a presence that does not need to make itself known until it decides that its gift has not been appreciated. I write the rules. That is what I do. The rules are supposed to make the things manageable, to put a workable structure around the unworkable, to give the people who come into contact with these objects a set of behaviors that produce survivable outcomes. The third rule of this object regarding the 5-minute limit on keeping the fog sealed in a container that is not room-like was discovered the way most of the rules in my documentation were discovered, which is through the thing happening to someone before we knew it was a thing that could happen. A security member was transporting the sealed fog across a distance that normally takes 10 minutes. At the 5-minute mark, the container failed. Another containment breach identical to the first. More people died. More swamp roses grew from places they should not have been able to grow from. I am the one who writes that it should not have been done the way it was done. I am always the one who writes that after the fact. The documentation accumulates and the rules proliferate, and the objects keep doing what they do, and the subjects keep complying with instructions they were told were for a voluntary study. And I sit in my enclosure under the hallucinated ceiling fluid, and I do not walk through the door that is not explicitly locked. I have started to wonder about the specific character of this particular object's presence in rooms, whether it is present now in the room where I write this, whether the absence of fog is evidence of safety or evidence of nothing at all, which is what Rule 2 tells me it is.
Whether the thing that waited quietly in an apparently empty containment room for 30 minutes, while I stood at my window looking at the nothing is capable of waiting in other kinds of rooms. Whether the gift it presents is always botanical. Whether the instruction to prostrate extends beyond the rooms that have been officially designated as containment spaces, or whether it, like the fog itself, considers itself to be in a room as long as there are 4 walls and a floor and a ceiling, and some form of exit. My enclosure has 4 walls, a floor, a ceiling, a door that is not explicitly locked, which functions as a form of exit. You thought you were alone. I do not know as I write this whether I am alone. I know that I cannot know, which is different from knowing that I am not, but which is also different from knowing that I am, which is what I would have said with confidence before this object, and what I cannot say with any confidence at all now. The framework I had built to make this work livable has been disassembled by an object that turned out to be not a thing, but a behavior. Not a presence, but a relationship. Not something you can see and point to and write rules around, but something that may be in the room with you right now, or may not be, and the absence of evidence either way is itself evidence of nothing. I sit here. I write. I document. The ceiling drips its hallucinated fluid, and the smell of spoiled peaches is constant. And somewhere in Foxglove Ridge, there are people who come in as subjects and do what they are told and believe, because they have been told that this is voluntary. I have not gone to tell them otherwise. I am still trying to understand why. The door is there. It opens from the inside. There is a world on the other side of it where the objects I have spent my career documenting are not things that most people know exist, where the rules I have written are not things most people know they need. There is a community of people who come to this facility under an arrangement they may not fully understand, and I am one of the people who understands it most, and I am sitting in my enclosure writing a document that may never be read by anyone outside this facility. The pager is on the desk. It is not called today. The containment rooms, as far as I know, are quiet. The shutter over the observation window is closed. I do not know what is on the other side of it. I have learned this week that not knowing is not the same as empty. I have learned that the thing present in a room does not require the fog to be present. I have learned that the time between me and whatever waits in the spaces I move through may not be over in any sense I can verify. May never be over. May have started long before I was aware enough to start counting. You thought you were alone. I thought a lot of things. I wrote them all down. I followed the procedures and observed the objects and documented the outcomes and wrote the rules. I built a structure around all of it, a careful and detailed structure made of language and categorization, and the belief that if I described things precisely enough, I could make them manageable. The last object I observed has no edges. It does not distinguish between containment spaces and other kinds of spaces. It considers itself in a room as long as there are 4 walls and a ceiling and a floor and some form of exit. I am in a room. I am still trying to determine what that means. I have not looked up at the ceiling in several hours. I am not sure I want to know whether the ceiling is moving. The door is there. The door is not explicitly locked. I am still here. Last one story start now. My dad had one rule: never open the garage door. Last night I found out why, and now I need to tell someone before it's too late. There was exactly one rule in our house that was never explained and never negotiated and never revisited once it was established. Every other rule had a reason attached to it, or at least a reason you could figure out if you thought about it long enough. Do not leave the back gate open because the dog will get out. Do not use the good towels for cleaning up spills because the good towels are for guests. Do not call the house phone after 9 because your grandfather goes to bed early and the ring wakes him up. Rules that made sense in the ordinary way that household rules make sense, that pointed back to some practical concern or social expectation or the specific preferences of the people who had organized their lives around the space you all shared. The garage rule did not point back to anything. It did not come with a reason. It came with a tone, a very specific tone that I learned. Young to treat as its own complete form of communication that required no additional content. The tone said that the rule existed, and that the rule was not subject to discussion, and that asking why would not produce an answer but would produce a different version of the conversation. A worse one. A version in which the rule was the same but the temperature of the room had changed. and something between me and my father had been slightly altered in a way that took time to repair. The tone said some things are the way they are, and your job is to accept that and move on. My dad spent hours in the garage every night. This was not a new thing and not an occasional thing.
It was a constant, a feature of our household so consistent and so established that it had become part of the background of our daily life. The same way the sound the furnace made or the particular creak of the third step on the stairs was part of the background.
He went out after my mother went to bed. He came back in at some point during the night. The garage door when he was in there was fully closed. The rule applied to me was simple. Do not go out to the garage when he is in there. Do not try the door. Do not knock. Do not press your face to the small window on the side. Do not. I was a reasonably obedient child, which I say not to congratulate myself, but to establish that the rule held for a long time. Longer than it probably would have held for some other versions of a kid who might have been more immediately curious or more constitutionally resistant to authority. I did not like not knowing. The not knowing sat in me with a faint low-level discomfort that I had learned to live with the way you learn to live with the noise in the background of things. Something you register but have decided not to address because the cost of addressing it is higher than the cost of continuing to register it. That calculation changed the night I heard the sounds. I had snuck out for reasons unrelated to the garage, the ordinary reasons that kids sneak out. The desire to be outside in the dark. The specific freedom of being somewhere you are not supposed to be while the people who are supposed to know where you are believe they know where you are. I was in the driveway, not planning to go anywhere in particular, just being outside in the dark, when I heard it. Clicking.
A regular rhythmic series of clicks that had a mechanical quality, the sound of parts engaging and releasing in sequence. Grinding, the kind of sound that happens when two surfaces with different textures are moving against each other. And underneath those sounds, something else, something that I did not have a clean category for. Something that combined the quality of a wet sound with the quality of an organic sound, a squelch that was both of those things at once. And underneath all of it, low and intermittent, something that was close to a groan. All of it coming from the other side of the garage door. I pressed my ear against the metal. The sounds became more distinct, more present, more impossible to process as anything that fit into the range of things a person might reasonably do in a garage in the middle of the night. The pinprick wave that moved down my spine was my body's first attempt to communicate to my brain something that my brain was not yet willing to accept. My brain accepted the sounds as data and filed them under unexplained and moved on. My spine knew better. I went inside. I went to bed. I did not sleep well. In the morning, I made the mistake of asking my father directly if he had been busy in the garage the previous night. The word mistake is not quite right because I do not think the asking itself was wrong. I think the information it produced was just information I had not been prepared for. The change in the room was immediate and complete, the way the quality of light changes when a cloud moves in front of the sun. Total and fast and leaving everything the same and simultaneously different. His eyes, when they found mine, were cold in a way his eyes had not been cold at me before. Cold in a way that communicated that I had moved, without being aware of moving, into territory that carried a different set of rules than the territory I was used to occupying with him. He was not a violent man. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what I am about to tell you, because the distinction between a man who is violent and a man who you understand in a particular moment could become violent is one that changes the texture of everything around it. He had never hit me. He had never threatened me. The coldness in his eyes that morning was not the coldness of a man preparing to hurt someone. There was something else. It was the coldness of a man who is protecting something so thoroughly and with such complete commitment that the protection itself has become a kind of presence in the room. A third thing between us that had its own weight and temperature. I stopped asking. The question died in the air between us, and we moved through the rest of the morning. And I watched him across the breakfast table, and I saw the same man I had always seen. My father, large and deliberate in the way he moved, slow and careful in the way he carried himself. And I tried to place the cold eyes inside the familiar person, and could not make them fit cleanly. I went back to the garage door several more times over the following weeks. I pressed my ear to the metal in the dark, and I listened to the clicking and the grinding and wet sounds and the low groans.
and I tried to build a picture in my head of what produced those sounds, what configuration of activity and materials would result in that specific combination of noise.
I ran through possibilities the way you run through possibilities when you are trying very hard to find the most acceptable explanation for something.
Tools, I thought. He is working with tools. The grinding is metal on metal. The clicking is parts being assembled or disassembled. The wet sounds are something with lubricant, something mechanical being maintained. The groaning I could not account for mechanically. The groaning kept arriving at an explanation I did not want to arrive at, kept pointing back toward a human origin,
toward sound produced by a person experiencing something rather than a tool experiencing use. I kept redirecting away from that explanation.
I kept arriving back at it.
I made a plan. The plan required daylight and required my parents to be occupied inside, which the preparation of dinner reliably achieved.
I went to the garage door and I created a gap at the bottom, just large enough to be functionally invisible from outside, but just small enough to allow a line of sight into the room from flat on the ground. That night, at 1 a.m, I went back. I pressed my body to the driveway and laid flat and put my face to the gap and looked into the room. My father was moving toward a shelf. He picked up a black container. He unscrewed the cap with the practiced ease of someone opening something they have opened many times before. Something that is familiar to the hands, if not to the person watching the hands.
He raised it above the limited field of view the gap allowed me, which cut off at about the height of his upper arm, and I heard the sounds of drinking, thick and laborious. The specific sound of liquid being consumed in large quantities with effort, with the kind of effort that suggests the liquid does not go down easily, but goes down anyway, because the going down is the point. The drips came into view first, long, yellow, viscous, falling from the height where his mouth was and landing on the front of his shirt, and then falling further to pool on the floor of the garage. Yellow and thick, and not anything that liquid that comes from human consumption is supposed to look like. Motor oil. The smell reached me a moment later and confirmed what the color and viscosity had already told me. He was drinking motor oil. Straight from the container in long gulping swallows with the grimace and the effort of someone doing something that takes effort, that is not easy, that requires the commitment of continuing past the point where the body's ordinary responses would say stop. I got up and went inside. The knot in my stomach was the first sign of what my body was beginning to understand before my mind caught up. I felt it as a physical thing, hard and weighted and present in a way that stomach discomfort is not usually present, more solid than nausea, more located than the general unease I had been carrying since the night with the sounds. I lay in bed and I felt it and I did not sleep, and by morning it was still there, unchanged, as though it had decided to take up residence rather than pass through. Looking at my father across the breakfast table the next morning was different from how it had been the morning before. The difference was in me, in the way I was looking, in the information I was now carrying that changed the processing of everything I observed. He looked the same, and he did not look the same. The rigidity of the way he moved, the deliberate slowness of it, the specific quality of his stillness when he was still. All of it had been there before, and I had seen it before, and registered it as simply the way my father moved, his particular physical style, nothing more. Now it looked like something else. It looked like the movement of something that had learned to move this way, that had calibrated its movement to approximate something, rather than being simply and naturally whatever it was. I went back the next night. I had made the gap larger, enough to see his whole body, enough to have a full view of whatever was about to happen rather than the partial view that had given me the motor oil and nothing else. He came in. He went to the toolbox. He took out the power drill. He took off his shirt. He turned away from me toward the far wall, and I watched him raise the drill to his own chest and pull the trigger. The sound the drill made was wrong in a specific and important way. It was not the sound of a drill going into wood or metal, or any of the common materials a drill encounters in a garage. It was the sound of a drill going into something that was solid but also yielding, something that had given to it along with the resistance, something that required the drill to work but accommodated it in a way that other materials do not. It sounded wet. The screw that fell to the floor was bloody. Then a second one, and then the sounds that followed, the popping and the creaking of things being moved out of the positions they occupied, were the sounds that my body processed before my mind did.
sounds that triggered the physical response of revulsion before I had consciously understood what I was hearing. He turned. He gave me a profile view, and I could see his chest, open like a door. A rectangle of skin had swung away from his body on some kind of hinge or seam that was not visible from the outside, and the interior of the space it had been covering was revealed in the light of the garage. I saw what was in the light. I saw it, and I could not unsee it, and every subsequent moment of my life has been lived by a person who has seen it. Pistons, metallic, shiny, interlaced. Gears of varying sizes, their teeth fitting into each other with the precision of things that were made to fit together. Belts running between structures I could not name. Black tubes of varying diameters. All of it coated in a brownish, reddish substance that was part fluid and part something else, that caught the light in the way that biological material catches light when it is wet. Copper wires running through the whole thing in loops and bunches, organized in ways that suggested purpose and destination. Connecting things to other things for reasons that the overall system presumably understood, even if I could not trace the logic of it. One lung blackened and shivering in the middle of all of it, expanding and contracting with each breath my father took. The only piece of the interior that I recognized as something I had a name for. There were no other organs I could identify. The chest cavity of my father was full of machinery. I gagged. The sound was involuntary, the body producing it without consulting me. The body registering what the eyes were feeding it, and responding with the ancient and automatic response to something deeply wrong. My hand moved to my mouth. My knuckles were white. My heart was doing something I could feel in my ears and in my fingertips. He looked down. His eyes found the gap at the bottom of the tarp I was behind, the sliver of my face that was visible. He found me with his eyes, and his eyes were the same eyes they had always been and also completely different. Dark and focused and holding something in them that I could not name, that required new vocabulary I did not have. He lowered the door of his chest and closed it, the skin hanging loose around the edges where it had been pulled and had not fully settled back. He lifted the tarp. He looked at me. He said my name. I could not speak. The words that my brain was producing to send to my mouth were not making it through whatever had shut down between intention and execution. He shook his head. He said I should have stayed out, that he had told me not to come in here, that I was no different from my mother, which was a thing he said as though it were a complete thought with a clear meaning, and not the most confusing sentence he had ever directed at me. And then he said the thing that I have been turning over and over since the moment he said it. The thing that I wrote this to try to process, the thing that I cannot stop thinking about. He said I was him. He said I was his son, which is not a new statement, which is a statement of obvious fact. And then he said it again in a way that was not a statement of obvious fact, but something that contained information I did not yet have, that pointed to something he knew and I did not, but was apparently on the verge of knowing, whether I wanted to or not. I ran. I got to my room and I locked the door and I stood in the middle of the room and I thought about the things he had said and the things my mother had said in the grocery store. The bright, cheerful voice she had used to tell me that my father was growing, big and strong, just like she did, just like I was now. The finger on my nose, the sickly sweet smile. The way she had framed it as a good thing, as something normal, as a process that a person undergoes and emerges from improved. Growing into what? The knot in my stomach had been there for days. It had started the night with the motor oil, and it had remained through everything. That followed, and it had grown in a way that knots of anxiety do not usually grow, in a way that was more literal than the metaphorical hardness of worry. It had become something I could locate with my hand, something I could feel through my shirt as an actual physical mass, hard and warm and present in a way that should not have been possible. I got my pocket knife. I sat on the edge of my bed and I held the knife and I thought about what I was about to do and whether I was certain enough about what I suspected to do it, and I decided that certainty in this situation was something I was no longer going to be able to access through normal means, that the only way to know was to look, that I had chosen looking before and I had to choose it again even though every previous time I had chosen it the looking had cost me something. I cut into the knot, an inch of blade. The hot pain of it was clean and immediate and real in a way that everything over the past weeks had stopped being real, and the skin peeled back in the way that skin peels when it is cut, and I looked at what was inside. A black tube. hard and plastic and deeply ridged and covered in the same brownish-reddish mucus that had coated the interior of my father's chest. Bent at an angle, warm to the touch when I poked it. Immovable in the way that things are immovable when they are structural, when they are load-bearing, when they are part of a system rather than a loose component. I am writing this here because I cannot keep it contained inside me any longer, and I cannot tell anyone I know, and I cannot talk to my parents about it, and I cannot pretend that I did not cut into my own stomach and find a plastic tube where something else was supposed to be. I am writing this because the alternative is to sit alone with it indefinitely, and I have been sitting alone with it long enough that the sitting alone has become its own kind of unbearable. I am terrified. I want to be completely honest about that. The terror is real and present and not going anywhere. Everything I thought I understood about my body, about my family, about the relationship between the person I believed I was becoming and the biological processes of becoming it, has been reorganized by what I found under my own skin. But there is something else alongside the terror. I am trying to be equally honest about this because I think it is important, even though it is the part I understand less, the part that I am still working out. When I touched the tube, when I felt its warmth and its solidity and its apparent purpose in the system I am only beginning to understand I am part of, something settled in me that had not been settled for weeks. The knot, which had been a source of discomfort and anxiety, became something else when I knew what it was. It became evidence of a process, of a thing happening on a timeline that did not consult me but also did not exclude me. My mother said growing. She said big and strong. She said just like I did, just like you are now. And she said it in the voice of someone describing something that should be anticipated rather than feared. Something that has already happened to her and is therefore survivable. That has happened to my father and is therefore part of how this family works. Part of the specific biology of this specific family that is apparently not the biology I was taught to expect. I do not fully know what I am. I thought I did and I no longer do, and that is its own kind of terror. But somewhere under the terror is something I am hesitant to call comfort, but that is the closest available word. The specific feeling of something clicking into place, of a question being answered even if the answer generates 10 more questions, of a system revealing itself to be a system, rather than a collection of inexplicable parts. The tube was warm. I have said that twice now. I keep coming back to it, the warmth of it, because warmth implies function, implies circulation, implies that whatever the tube is part of is working, is operating, is doing what it was built to do inside me without my knowledge and without my permission, but also apparently for my benefit, according to some design that predates my ability to have opinions about it. I am not fully what I thought I was. This is the true and undeniable conclusion of everything I have documented here. The body I live in contains things that the body I believed I lived in was not supposed to contain. My father's body contains those same things. More of them, more developed, further along in whatever the process is. My mother's body apparently contains them too. Has already completed whatever transition she was describing in that grocery store in her bright, cheerful voice with her finger on my nose. There is a family secret, and I am part of it. And I have been part of it since before I was old enough to have a choice about it, which is the only way that being part of something can be true from the very beginning. I am growing. My mother said so. The tube under my skin confirms it. My father, standing in a garage in the middle of the night with his chest open and the machinery of him gleaming under a bare bulb, is what the growing becomes. I do not yet know how to feel about that. I am still working on it. I suspect the working on it will take longer than one night's worth of writing into the dark, but I am writing it here because some part of me needed the outside world to know. Needed there to be a record that exists somewhere beyond the walls of this house and the specific silence my family has maintained around what we are. Needed to say out loud, in whatever sense writing into the dark is out loud, that I cut into myself and found a plastic tube and I am not entirely the thing I thought I was. I am my father's son. He said so. He said it like it meant something specific, like it was a complete answer to a question I had not yet finished asking. And maybe it is. Maybe that sentence contains everything I need to know, even though it does not yet contain everything I need to understand. I am going to close the incision as best I can. I am going to try to sleep. I am going to get up in the morning and sit across the breakfast table from my parents, and look at them knowing what I know and try to figure out what comes next. The rule about the garage still exists. I broke it. I do not regret breaking it, because the not knowing had become its own kind of unbearable. And the knowing, even this knowing, even knowing that involves a pocket knife and a plastic tube in the interior of my father's chest visible in the light of a bare bulb, is better than the not knowing. Just barely. But better. I am growing. Just like my dad. I will be big and strong. Soon.